Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are breaking down an absolute macroeconomic firestorm. We're talking about the high-stakes, nearly impossible crisis facing the new Federal Reserve Chairman, Kevin Warsh, as he grabs the gavel in 2026. Right out of the gate, Warsh is staring down a truly toxic mix: massive geopolitical inflation on one side, and this towering, unprecedented mountain of sovereign debt on the other. It's a massive structural math problem, and honestly, it's going to define the global economy for years to come.
Look at this number, because this is the immediate geopolitical reality Warsh inherited. An inflation rate roaring right back up to 4.2%. Fueled heavily by massive supply disruptions from the war in Iran, this number is more than double the Fed's strict 2% target. Warsh didn't inherit some calm, cooling economy. He stepped right into the jaws of a structural inflation monster. So in this explainer, we're going to walk down this literal fork in the road. We'll cover the June debut shock, explore Path A, which is the Volcker purge, dive into Path B, financial repression, examine what we call the consumer stranglehold, and finally wrap up with Warsh's impossible dilemma. Let's get right into it, because either path he chooses is going to directly impact your wallet.
All right, let's kick things off with part one, the June debut shock. This all starts at Warsh's very first Federal Open Market Committee meeting.
So Warsh was appointed by President Trump, and pretty much everyone on Wall Street was expecting a cooperative, pro-rate cut central bank. But instead of playing along, Warsh completely rewrote the script. Faced with the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, the PCE, running hot at 3.8%, he absolutely blindsided the markets. They held rates steady right between 3.5 and 3.75% and promised absolutely zero cuts. But the real jaw-dropper? The communication purge. Warsh literally slashed the Fed's official statement and just completely ditched traditional forward guidance.
By doing this, he was explicitly telling the markets, hey, you are on your own to navigate this. And Wall Street? Well, Wall Street panicked. Stripped of the usual hand-holding they were so used to getting from the Fed, the market reacted violently. The Dow plummeted 500 points in a single afternoon. Right then and there, Warsh proved he was absolutely not the passive dove everyone expected.
Which brings us perfectly to part two and his first major option, Path A, the Volcker purge.
Dealing with that sticky 4% inflation, half of the FOMC voters actually signaled they feel they have to raise rates by the end of 2026. They're borrowing straight from Paul Volcker's 1980s playbook. This means tightening monetary policy until it literally breaks something, pushing the benchmark rate past 4.5, maybe even 5% to aggressively stomp out this supply shock inflation.
But here is the massive structural barrier that Paul Volcker never had to worry about back in his day. When Volcker famously jacked interest rates up to 20% in the 80s, the U.S. national debt-to-GDP ratio was sitting around a manageable 30%. Fast forward to 2026, we are dealing with over $34 trillion in national debt, pushing that ratio well over 120%.
And to put that into perspective, the math on this debt mountain is downright terrifying. If Warsh forces interest rates higher and keeps them there for longer to crush inflation, the U.S. government's interest payments alone will rapidly explode past $1.5 trillion a year. That is a systemic fiscal crisis waiting to happen. It's basically a trillion-dollar trap that makes the old 1980s solution incredibly dangerous for the actual solvency of the government.
So, since a true Volcker shock could inadvertently bankrupt the U.S. Treasury, let's look at part three, Path B, financial repression.
Economists are widely speculating that Chairman Warsh, along with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, might quietly lean toward this alternative. It's a stealthy strategy formerly known as financial repression. In plain English, it's the policy of inflating the debt away. Instead of hiking rates to forcefully crush inflation back down to 2%, the central bank tries a very different, invisible approach. The math behind this is kind of like a magic trick. Step one, the Fed quietly tolerates a new normal of maybe 3 to 4% inflation. Step two, they artificially cap nominal interest rates below that inflation level, let's say at 3.5%. And then, step three, they just sit back and watch the real value of the national debt shrink every single year. By paying off those massive old liabilities with depreciated, less valuable dollars, the government's balance sheet crisis slowly solves itself over time. It's a highly calculated, completely invisible liquidation of sovereign debt.
Okay, moving to part four, the consumer stranglehold. Here is why all this high-level central bank math actually matters to you.
Because while inflating the debt away might totally save the Treasury, it definitely doesn't come for free. The American consumer is caught squarely in the crosshairs here. Take a look at this side by side. If Warsh goes full Volcker, everyday citizens are looking at mortgage rates spiking past 8%, credit card debt completely breaking household budgets, and unemployment ticking up as the economy cools down. But if Warsh chooses to inflate the debt, the pain just changes shape. Groceries and insurance stay permanently elevated, and any cash savings you have systematically lose 4% of their purchasing power year after year.
The real-world toll of financial repression functions like a massive, unvoted tax passed directly onto Main Street. First, you get what's called the yield gap. Consumers suffer this persistent, grinding loss of purchasing power because, let's face it, wages rarely keep pace with structural 4% inflation. Families are watching their standard of living decline while doing the exact same amount of work. And second, you get the asset divide. Under an inflation-tolerant Fed, hard assets like real estate and equities, which are usually owned by the wealthy, continue to pump up in nominal value. Meanwhile, the cash savings of the working and middle classes just erode away. This dynamic locks the lower arm of our K-shaped economy firmly into place.
Which finally brings us to Part 5, Warsh's impossible dilemma, the absolute monetary crossroads.
Chairman Warsh has to neutrally weigh these brutal mathematical realities, knowing there is no real victory condition here, just different kinds of sacrifice. Path A, the Volcker purge, demands aggressive rate hikes to hit that strict 2% target. It could trigger a deep recession and debt restructuring, making the primary victims the U.S. Treasury and asset markets. On the flip side, Path B, financial repression, requires keeping rates below inflation, accepting a de facto 3.5 to 4% target and leading to permanent currency debasement. And the primary victim there, the American consumer and saver.
So as you navigate this wildly complex 2026 economy, I want to leave you with the ultimate impossible question the Federal Reserve is being forced to answer right now. Trapped in this structural bind, will Kevin Warsh choose to protect the solvency of the United States government, or will he protect the purchasing power of your paycheck? Keep a very close eye on the Fed's next moves, because whichever path they take, we are all going to feel it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.